Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark McNack, and my co-host Rob Branton are joined today by Shannin Metatawabin, CEO of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, Canada's national network of more than 50 Indigenous financial institutions. When Indigenous entrepreneurs needed capital, the commercial banking system was not there. NACCA was. 55,000 loans, 3.6 billion Canadian dollars, a 97% repayment rate. These are small businesses, the backbone of any economy, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. And now NACCA is raising capital for the Indigenous Growth Fund, an institutional-grade evergreen vehicle backed by the Government of Canada and 3 federal Crown corporations, with the Canadian LP structure available to international investors. In this conversation, you will learn why this network sits at the center of Canada's economic agenda. Welcome to Shannin Metatawabin, CEO of National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, otherwise known as NACCA. Great to have you on the podcast with us.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, hi Shannon. Great to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Great to meet you guys.
So, Shannin, before we get into NACCA and the work you do, would you take a moment to tell our UK and continental European audience a little bit about yourself, where you came from, the community you are from, the family and the path that brought you here, and of course, where you are today?
Kachimigwach msue e peche pagatungo yanche peche nagashategay. So my name is Shannin Metatawabin. I'm from Fort Albany, Ontario, and this is my community's medallion, and I like to wear it just to remind myself of where I do come from, people that I do represent and speak for, and the people that I get my guidance from. So I've been the CEO for the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association for working on 10 years now. I'm a father of 4. I've in the work that we do business development lending. I had done this work just out of university when I went to Carleton University, and I started doing the due diligence on providing financing to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And so it's been full circle in my career coming back to as a CEO of National Aboriginal Capital Corporations. So thank you for allowing me to be on this podcast today.
Our pleasure, Shannon. And let's bring our listeners into NACCA itself. NACCA is the national umbrella for an Indigenous financial institution network that spans more than 50 IFIs across Canada. And recent numbers I've seen, that group have deployed more than $3.6 billion in development lending across 55,000 Indigenous businesses over the past 35 years. But for our audience, maybe encountering NACCA for the first time, can you describe what the IFIs are, what the network looks like on the ground, and why it's been such a quiet success story?
Yeah, sure. NACCA was created to fill a need. We had a gap in access to capital for Indigenous people to become entrepreneurs. There wasn't any point of getting a loan. My dad has his own story of trying to go to the bank back in the 80s and going to the bank to seek a loan to do his business, his sawmill business, and they just looked at him and they said, obviously no. He's an Indigenous man. There's just no way that you're going to be eligible. There's a systemic barrier at the bank itself just by walking in the door. Never mind that Indigenous people were prevented from accumulating generational wealth. They don't have credit records, credit checks that would pass. So there's a number of barriers, including even legislative barriers with Section 89 of the Indian Act that prevents banks from taking security. So many different barriers required the creation of our own network. Indigenous financial institutions were created within the areas that they are around Canada. It started with 6 of them back in the 90s, and they're celebrating their 40th anniversary, most of them this year. and other ones were created shortly after that. They are essentially governed by their communities. Each of the communities provides representatives onto their boards. So each of the IFIs essentially act like a cooperative. They provide the financing within those catchment areas. They understand their market. They understand the risks. They understand the stories that enable them to provide good decisions on financing provided to the individuals within those catchment areas. Now we've got more than 50 of them from coast to coast to coast, providing loans to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. I worked out of the Toronto office when I first began, and then I worked up in Wabatek Business Development Corporation, which is an area where you actually had to go out and search for the entrepreneurs, develop their capacity, be the cheerleader to help them, empower them so that they looked at entrepreneurship as an option for their career. And I've done this for 30 years now. I understand the network and the market very well. The network makes good business decisions. It's 97% repayment rates in most cases. Some of that is attributed to not having enough capital to deploy, but we'll talk about how we've sort of put into place some mechanisms to provide more capital so we can take more risks, we can make bigger loans, and we can make a bigger impact on the Canadian economy.
Wow, and that 97% repayment rate, I mean, that's competitive with any of the banks.
Well, it's a lot higher than the banks, I'd say.
Even better. They want all your customers.
They
right?
do.
But you've obviously developed the relationships over time. And just to come back about how this got started, this was the communities that came together. And I guess, as you said, they're like a co-op or a mutual, and said, we need to sort out, financing for the entrepreneurs, or, we all call them entrepreneurs today, but for the business people locally who needed access to capital. So this was really a, at the ground initiatives, and then saw that it was happening across a number. And is that how then NACCA came into being, or?
Well, each of the regions created their own financial institution, and they started lending within their area, and the government supported with some backstopping some capital initially. But they learned quickly that they had to organize themselves and create a collective, because the government making decisions at the time was going to transfer the responsibility over to the Business Development Bank of Canada, because that's essentially what our network is. We are an Indigenous version of the Business Development Bank of Canada, but they didn't want to be managed by the Business Development Bank of Canada. They wanted to create their own entity, which created the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. And we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. We're celebrating it this year. And within that time period, $3.6 billion and 55,000 loans. And we seem to be accelerating that, because my mandate when I first joined was to bring more enabling supports to allow our members to be able to deploy more capital. And loan portfolio was part of it, but there's also government enabling support programs that de-risk each and every loan. And we've seen that that program has proved dividends year over year again in providing good impacts. And so we return to historical levels of funding, because this program started with a certain level of support 30 years ago, and then saw a gradual decline in the support for the programs. And we were able to return to historical levels of support for entrepreneurs back in 2024. And since 2024, we've seen an increase by 60% in lending, from 109 million a year to 176 million a year. And we just continue to rise with the demand, as people understand that we do have the capital now available. We do have programs now available. So we're seeing a shift in people looking to the IFI network as a viable option of obtaining financing for their startups.
Yes. Wow. And you took over as CEO of NACCA in late 2016, I think.
That's when I was brought on. Yes, and the first mandate they brought me in for was to identify a viable and sustainable source of capital, so that each of the IFIs and our members can have a loan portfolio that meets the demand within their catchment area.
Yes. Well, obviously, you've achieved that and well on the way, working with others in the NACCA organization, the IFIs across the country, to take it to a whole new level. Rob and I have found from the work we've been doing, we've met a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs. And I would say some of the best entrepreneurs in Canada today are Indigenous, and certainly those who know how to compete in this brave new world we came in, because the Indigenous people have never had a break. You already knew what it was to fight to survive. So you're all set, and an example for many Canadians across the country about how to compete successfully. So really great to have you on the program.
Oh, thank you very much.
Those are impressive numbers, Shannin. And I know with NACCA, you're always looking for new vehicles. Maybe talk a little bit about the Indigenous Growth Fund and who's put money into that, and how's that helping?
Well, along with my mandate to identify new capital, we tried the standard approach of approaching government with a business case demonstrating the investment that would be made by providing new capital to the network, but they weren't interested in that. They wanted to see a sustainable vehicle that can be used perpetually into the future. So we modeled an evergreen fund that backstopped by the government of Canada and some crown corporations. The Business Development of Canada was a close partner, as was Farm Credit Canada and the EDC, all putting in support. 50 million for the government, 50 million for the BDC, 35 million for Farm Credit Canada, and the EDC put in $15 million. And then we got a private placement of $3 million by Block. So the whole intent is to enable private sector investment. It's an institutional grade investment tool. And that was the first fundraise, and we're actually into the process of doing a second fundraise. But we have to make sure that we sequentially identify the market so that we can deploy the money and then make a call on the capital that we've had committed. And we've been doing quite well. I think we're up to about $100 million out of a $153 million fund, and we want to start raising some more.
That's 100 million. 100 million deployed.
It's in the process of being deployed.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been moved to the members, and they're deploying that capital. So it's demonstrating that we're ahead of schedule with our deployment of the capital and the planning that we've made. So the IFIs, not all of them across the country, are participating at this point as they build up their capacity, as they sort of rework their market, and they see that the opportunity to increase the size of their loans, to support more innovative type businesses, larger projects, get involved in major projects, get scaling some of those businesses. Everybody's in the process of sort of scaling their operations so that they can take on and utilize this capital. So we've got a certain number of IFIs that are currently utilizing the program, but we have an opportunity to provide additional capital to the remaining IFIs. So it's got its runway of deployment, and I think by doing some fundraise and getting more capital out there, it's going to demonstrate that it's growing at a sustainable level.
Sounds like you're on a runway, and you're already taking off and making good progress. And as you said, you're looking to raise some more funds in the near future. So for a UK pension fund or asset manager or continental European institutional investor hearing about IGF for the first time and NACCA and what you're doing, what does meaningful participation actually look like? You know, the fund is evergreen and open to accredited investors. You're accepting new commitments. So what scale of investment does it accommodate? And have you had interest from overseas yet? I'm sure you will in the future.
So if we're looking at potential UK or European investment, it's an institutional grade investment, but we have to have a Canadian investment. So subsidiary in Canada would be required. Have an LP here in Canada, and that allows it. It's already been proven by Block. Did a similar thing here in Canada with the $3 million, and all our investors have remained into it as an evergreen. They can buy in and then buy out. but everybody's had their capital remain in the fund and perpetually reinvest into our network. And we're looking for investors that want to make an impact in the long term. We are making great social impacts. One of our IFIs did a study that demonstrated that for each Indigenous entrepreneur that starts a business, it's an improvement of life satisfaction of 72%. Mental health indicators are improved by 52%, and health indicators by 20%. So it's an actual investment for the Canadian economy to invest into an Indigenous entrepreneur, because the social spend on the Indigenous community has been just creeping up year over year, and we have a long way to go before our community is part of the prosperity of Canada. So we are on a long-term trajectory and a long-term plan to participate. So every step is always an improvement, and that's what we're currently on. And we're looking for an Indigenous investment would be nice. Maybe some of the trust money that's out there, European international money would be very good. It would make a very good story, because the Indigenous market in Canada is essentially the untapped market in the globe. We attended a Harvard program where we're looking at the capital that exists globally, and capital is always looking for a place to invest, and you're finding less and less places to make that return. But the Indigenous community is an untapped source. If we can develop that market and show that it has a return to the economy, then investors are well set to have a return with this process.
Yes. Well, that will resonate here in the city, which is the home of sustainable finance. So there's a lot of people looking at opportunities like this. And I think this is something that will appear as a new opportunity worth considering. So that is very interesting. And I think you're right in terms of the participating in the prosperity of the country. And the country benefits from that because everybody moves up when that happens, and Canada becomes a more competitive and dynamic economy because you have the full participation of all the individuals. So
yeah, exactly.
Great.
Yeah, Shannon, you've seen some big changes over your tenure at NACCA, but what do you attribute? What are the biggest changes you've seen that are generating the kind of interest you're talking about in Indigenous business investment?
Well, I think when I first started, the conversation around Indigenous prosperity didn't even exist. And as I've been telling the story about the network, because it's a very successful story, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development out of Paris, they have 80 member states, and they have almost 500 Indigenous people within all those member states. They use the Indigenous Financial Institution Network and the NACCA model as a best practice that we want to share with international Indigenous communities. And we recently hosted Australian and Maori representatives here at our Indigenous Prosperity Forum, where we're really talking about that partnership and the sharing of best practices. I can see Indigenous financial institutions in New Zealand, in Australia, learning from the experience that we've gained over the last 40 years so that they can start providing loans to their entrepreneurs, creating their own growth funds to deploy more capital, creating venture funds, creating different types of funds to deploy for infrastructure, for housing. There's all sorts of needs, and we have the models that are demonstrated and that work. It's just a matter of the communities working together. And we also want to learn from their procurement experiences with their supply nation and the New Zealand experience. So we're working closely together, and I think it's a great opportunity. And the international community is seeing that the Indigenous community is moving into prosperity planning. deploying a lot of capital. They're seeing a lot of opportunity. So there's money to be made in the Indigenous community, but there's also partnerships to be made, and communities recognize that in order to unpackage all those opportunities, they have to create partnerships and create partners. And that's what we're seeing right now across the world.
Beautiful. Another great Canadian export. The creativity of Canadian Indigenous business people and the way we're doing business these days, we're seeing the same thing, interest from different parts of the world wanting to understand what's happening in Canada and how they could replicate a lot of it in their home jurisdictions. So well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and I guess with all the recent news with the new Prime Minister, Carney, and the government and focus on getting Canada going again with major projects, obviously there's a spill off across the country for SMEs and entrepreneurs because, yes, there might be huge CapEx programs, but there's a whole supplier base. Are you seeing some of the customers of the IFIs looking at how they can participate and tap into those projects as they start to come on stream, and some of them are near completion? I'm sure there's been a number of Indigenous success stories already.
Well, this is another area of transition for the country. Indigenous people have been communicating their willingness to work together with the government of Canada. Indigenous people, just for your listeners to understand, have rights and title to the lands in Canada, and there's 300 court cases that affirm rights and title. So in most areas of Canada, there's an Indigenous community that you need to engage with in order to have free, prior, informed consent of that area. And it's an easy thing to do if you include the Indigenous community as partners early and often. Some of the 3 pillars that I've talked about recently is equity ownership, and we've seen that the government of Canada has responded with a guarantee program that's up to $10 billion. So it allows communities to have a guarantee so that they can access some financing. That's going to help. A fund would actually help as well, an equity fund. In a robust IBA, so impact benefit agreements, are kind of a standard tool, but they can always improve. And that really is a roadmap for the community's plan of how the impacts are recognized. Usually there's business opportunities wrapped up into those. And that's where our IFIs come into place, where we're scaling up those businesses to participate in each and every one of those major projects. And the 3rd pillar is some type of revenue share with the government. And each community is speaking in different ways about wanting to participate and be partners in some of these in some fashion. And I think if the government and I think our partners understand these basic needs and the needs to support the community so that they have minimum infrastructure within their communities, because it's hard to participate in the major projects if people don't have houses, if they don't have running water. And you've probably heard that is a big issue in Canada, because it is. Our country is vast. We have 634 First Nations, and vast majority of those have clean running water, but we have a need for about 130,000 houses in our communities. The AFN did a recent report that they demonstrated about $350 billion in infrastructure needs for our communities just to close the gap to be alongside a regular Canadian. And when that takes place, then somebody's prepared to look to the future. When you're just surviving, you can't think about the future. And I think that's where a lot of the friction happens right now, is that our communities are in survival mode. They're not in prosperity mode. And I'm trying to create that conversation about prosperity, about thinking about the future, while concurrently fixing some of the gaps and making sure that we have healthy and capable people that have capacity training and that have the skills so that they can participate in the long term. It's not just a tokenized partnership where they sign on the dotted line and they don't participate anymore. No, we have to have people working. We have to have people participating in the prosperity of the future.
I guess it comes a bit back to, hygiene and motivating factors. And as you said, there's still some hygiene factors that are not addressed, which is unbelievable. And I know you said most of the communities now have, running water. Canada has the largest freshwater reserves in the world. Mm-hmm. And to think any Canadian does not have access to fresh water, this just is just wrong.
It is. And then, it all comes down to infrastructure. We're so vast and so big that every situation has got its own challenges. And having the investment to make sure that there's a water treatment plant that can process that water in every community, that is the struggle. So I think that they're trying to address some of the needs, but there's really not enough to go around. So everybody needs to be part of the solution, and that's where we're sort of wanting everybody to participate.
Shannin, tell us about some of the other advocacy you do and some of the other hot button issues at the moment. Huge opportunities for Indigenous business in procurement, for example, but some controversy recently. And what work is NACCA doing in that area?
Well, as a 40 years doing the work, the organization has certain responsibilities to represent our community. We're mandated by the Assembly of First Nations to do the work we do, and not every organization is. So we take that seriously. So we try to get involved in conversations that enable the unpackaging of opportunities. If you don't do one thing, then you obviously can't do the other thing. So you have to do everything concurrently. One of them is procurement. So we are trying to stand up the First Nations Procurement Authority. This would enable an organization to be the intermediary between Indigenous business and the government and corporate Canada. And right now, the Indigenous Services Department of the Government of Canada have been trying to do that for the past 30 years, but they've had a lot of challenges. And indigeneity is one of them. Verification of indigeneity is, you've seen that in the news, and you've probably seen me talking about it in the news. It's a simple thing that if an organization has the capability to do it, they should do it. The IFI network has been doing it for 40 years. Every loan we provide, we verify that the person is an Indigenous person. So it's not something that cannot be done for procurement. We should be able to easily do it. And the technology exists now that we can do it. So it's more of if there's a will, there's a way. Right now, we're just trying to get the will there and the resources to stand up that First Nations Procurement Authority, because the rights holders have asked and they've mandated that organization to exist. So the government just needs to pull the trigger and support that process and that organization so that they can have the same success that Supply Nation Australia is happening. And I'm pretty sure that the CEO for Supply Nation said that they supported $5 billion in procurement opportunities in Australia last year. So it has the potential to get to that level if there's a mechanism in place that everybody trusts. Right now, nobody trusts what the process is.
Real important point. And again, just making the Canadian economy more dynamic in the process.
Oh, for sure. And it comes down to the point of providing equity and of opportunities. Indigenous people have been excluded from the economy for so long that it's systemic now to continue excluding us. And there's frontline managers that wouldn't consider, providing an opportunity to an Indigenous business right now because they know who they're working with and they don't want to make any changes, right? But if you really want to see Indigenous people participate, because 5% of the population is Indigenous, that's the minimum standard of the procurement mandate that's been put on by the government. Let's have at least 5% of the business go there. Makes a lot of sense, but there's so many different challenges along the way to get there that they're having a little bit of difficulty getting to that point. And I could foresee it being 10 to 15% of all procurement going through Indigenous once the scale of the businesses meets the needs of the opportunities.
Yes. And like many things, government needs to get out of the way sometime. As you said, you can identify who is. So what's this whole bureaucracy? And we need bureaucracies from time to time, but it's proven it's not working the way it's done. So hopefully there's movement on that much quicker than there has been in the past. You mentioned a little bit about governance. So Can we talk about how decisions are made, the capital flows, the accountability maintained with the Indigenous Growth Fund?
Well, Indigenous Growth Fund. Okay, so the Indigenous Growth Fund was created by NACCA, so we're the sole shareholder of the IGF. But it's got its own board, so it's got its own representatives on the board to make decisions. It's got its own investor committee that makes decisions independently on each and every business case, and decisions are made by consensus, and everybody has to be on board with the decisions. NACCA in itself, we are a community governed entity. Like I said, each community provides a board member to the local IFI, and then the IFI provides a representative to the NACCA board. So we're very ingrained into the community. We try to connect with the Assembly of First Nations and make sure that we are always on the same page with strategy and the way that we're moving forward. Access to capital has been a topic of discussion for many years, and everybody's moving in that direction right now. But the governance of the IGF, we have an investment committee, a board, separation from NACCA, so it's a separate entity, done at the highest level, and we're doing quite well with it.
Shannon, any areas we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
Well, I think the function of the IGF, it's a unique model. What we do is we raise private sector capital, and right now we've got the Crowns and the government participating along with Block. So that money is lent out to our members, and our members in turn use that capital to lend it to their businesses within their regions. And so we have a layered approach to how the risk is looked at. Investors are paid first. We have the government. We have NACCA as part of the ownership. So as NACCA earns units, then it's reinvested into the equity of the fund. I've actually toyed with that. It's essentially a sovereign wealth fund when you look at it. It's going to perpetually be there for our people. As we earn interest revenues, it's reinvested into the fund, and so it'll be there for our people in the future. And I'm very excited about the model. We're interested in sharing the model to other Indigenous groups around the world because it has shown that it works very well.
Sounds like a success story, and hopefully we'll see you at our summit in 2027. It's been a great conversation, Shannin, to have you with us today to learn about NACCA and the IFIs. If it hasn't been on the radar over here, I think the profile will certainly increase after this. Fantastic to have the discussion.
What I'm trying to communicate right now to our partners, our government supports, is that the talk with Carney and the one economy with major projects, you can't have one without the other. Small businesses prop up major projects. We have to scale up those businesses that are going to support major projects. And it's really important to continue supporting the NACCA and the IFI network, because we are going to be integral to scaling up the businesses that are going to make those major projects successful. So I always try to reinforce that there's a connection there. You don't just talk about major projects without thinking about the small businesses that are going to prop them up. So it's really important. They end up being the economic engine.
Absolutely.
That's where the big projects deliver for the country and everybody in the country.
Exactly.
Big projects are a group of small projects make up the big projects, and it's those smaller businesses that actually execute these major projects.
And there's one more thing I wouldn't mind clarifying. I know we had one of the questions might have been talking about what is the financial landscape in the Indigenous community here in Canada. Now we have, I guess you can call it micro and small business has been assumed by the NACCA network, providing small loans to Indigenous entrepreneurs. We have the First Nations Financial Authority that are providing supports to infrastructure and major economic opportunities. So larger capital, in excess of $5 million to $50 million, let's say. NACCA has really, we're focusing on the 5 million and below as our space to support Indigenous entrepreneurs. And that's a good distinction to have so that your investors understand where the capital plays.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, Shannin, Nyawangoa, for joining us today and also for all you've done throughout your career to advance prosperity for Indigenous people in Canada. Thanks for your time again.
Thank you. Thank you to Shannin for sharing his insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.